Pentagon says 900 U.S. troops have deployed or are deploying to Middle East amid heightened tension. So just a few days out from Halloween, and we have not even prepared our Halloween party, but don't worry. We don't need much. All we'll have to do is put on CNN and a bunch of other news outlets and just have them run continuous news coverage of how the U.S. is about to enter a massive regional conflict, which could bleed out into World War III. The one thing I can say is that whereas this is getting crazy, what's going on in the Middle East, it seems like Ukraine's dying down.
Yeah, what's that?
So maybe
Zelensky will tell you all about it. Do not worry.
Maybe it won't be World War III because everyone kind of forgot Ukraine's happening.
Yeah.
And that's, gone. But at the same time, as we're seeing these deployments, we have this from, The Guardian is also talking about U.S. deployment. But we have this from Fox News. Israeli forces conduct tank raid in Gaza ahead of expected invasion. I am not going to play these stupid double-speak games with you. You do not have video even of tanks storming through the border and killing people and blowing things up and say, we didn't invade yet. That's quite literally, you invaded. Now they're trying to make this distinction, likely because they want to downplay their actions. And we know when the word gets out, it's not like any foreign country cares about what we call it. This is for the American people. They don't want the American people to hear Israel has invaded Gaza. U.S. deploys troops to the region. So they say, no, there's no invasion yet. Just a tank raid.
The tanks are just going for a walk. They need to stretch their legs, test out their wheels. So, it's not a big deal.
It's not an invasion.
Stop asking us questions.
It's an incursion.
They know once the American people hear words like World War III, there's no coming back. And then I think the media is afraid to define it as such. Although I also think they want it. I think a lot of people in media do want this war.
They need their casus belli before the escalation. If World War III keeps getting repeated over and over again, and we hear about troop deployments, and there's no justification for it, people are going to reject it. It's going to poison the well. So that's why they got to downplay the language and make it seem like nothing's happening. It's just, things are getting tense. Then when U.S. forces are attacked or there's some kind of terror attack or something happens, they can then say, now we've invaded.
Right. Do you think to a certain extent they also want to normalize it? They want people in the U.S. to think, oh, well, our troops are already there. Of course they're there. They had
Look
to
at
be
Syria.
There.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember the point at which we entered Syria and started building military bases?
No. But then they could run the headline, American military base bombed or whatever.
It was all of a sudden Donald Trump's like, oh, yeah, we've had troops in Syria and we're getting them out. And we're like, wait, what? Really?
We were there? Yeah.
We were there? Yeah, we're getting the troops out. And they lied about that, too. Mm-hmm. They don't want the American people to know. This is the craziest thing, that there are secret wars going on. Mm-hmm. And this is 10 years ago. What was going on in Yemen was described as a secret war. The American people did not know it was happening. And it's still happening. And now Syria and all these countries, I wonder if they realized, hey, we don't need to generate public support if we just don't tell them it's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Just don't write it.
No. Once you just tell them we're already doing it, people expect that it's normal, right? If they're used to seeing the headlines, they don't care. And that's what I think is the most frustrating thing about the 24-hour news cycle. It's not that we don't need to have it. Of course, with the internet, you have to keep up. On the other hand, everything becomes information overload. So you're used to seeing American troops in places that you didn't expect them because by the time you wake up in the morning, 45 stories have been written about it. Right. There's no way to just say like, oh, wait,
it's just getting normalized.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. When I walked in the room just now and I asked you guys, what are we starting with? I'd been on another show for an hour and the world can change in that hour, and you're like, oh, Israel's invaded Gaza. Like, oh wow,
Yeah.
And that's how I feel when I fly now. I get in an airplane, I'm afraid to come down. I'm like, what will the world look like when I land?
Well, I mean, the internet on airplanes is pretty good these days.
I never get it. I never get Wi-Fi on the airplane.
Well,
why not?
I get work done. I get to write.
Yeah, I do that.
I have two loud kids, and I get it's my office space up in the air. But yeah,
I mean, when I'm flying, I'm online. That's what I do, tracking the news.
Yeah, I'm a caveman.
I kind of sometimes it's nice to be able to plug in. Like when we were flying to Miami, I was transcribing an interview I had done, and that way I couldn't open 4 or 5 tabs. You know what I mean? Because it's easy. I'm 100 years old, Tim. What can I say?
No, it's just like the worst job ever.
I know.
The worst thing.
But occasionally there's things that you're thinking, if I just buckle down and do this, it will be great. But the mainstream media doesn't. I mean, and the same thing with social media, right? They need you to constantly be checking your apps. They need you to want the notifications.
Yeah.
They need you to be hooked up to the dopamine. And in some ways, the way this news cycle is working, I'm sure everyone can point to something else. It reminds me a lot of the beginning of COVID, right? Mm-hmm. Every 5 seconds,
that's their business model,
right? Mm-hmm. You're checking constantly for updates on where you're allowed to go. Do you remember that during COVID we there were states where you couldn't travel from another state.
Yeah.
That was such a bizarre time. And so you were constantly looking for new information.
Weren't there checkpoints between New York and Connecticut?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Does he like full tests to go to Hawaii?
Yeah.
That's a lot of tests.
There was
to Hawaii,
that woman who got arrested because she flew to Hawaii and then filmed herself like walking around, and they were like, "You didn't quarantine and get tested and stuff."
They almost didn't let me in the room to see my daughter be born. I had to handcuff myself almost to my wife.
Wow. This was one of my opening stories to Shane. He was like, "Yeah, I brought handcuffs and I wasn't going to go anywhere. I was going to handcuff myself to the bed." And I was
There
like,
was no way. I was ready.
Wow,
dude,
And then she was the only one who had to get, your wife was the only one who had to get COVID tested in the room.
Oh, yeah. And I had a governor who was a mass murderer. We can get into that later. But speaking about like the news and missing it for an hour, like last time I was on IRL last week, it was when the hospital was supposedly bombed, right?
Oh, yeah.
Within that first hour, there were multiple realities about that. Or last night, I'm watching the main thing unfold with the shooter, and there's people sharing multiple videos that aren't true or pictures of people that aren't the suspect. So it's almost like it doesn't matter what happens in an hour, because in that first hour of news breaking, there's a distortion of all this noise, and no one knows the truth, and probably for the next few weeks too, until we know more.
Sometimes I like the first hour after a story has broken because just the bare minimum details are coming out, and it gives you something to build off of, because by the time the identity of whoever's involved or the total numbers of death or these kind of tragic details that are incredibly important to report accuracy, by the time those are out, there's already a slant and you can see the way it's being bent.
It's funny because I typically say, when I was teaching journalism, I like to tell the students, your best source for information is the stuff that's closest to the event. So like in Maine, it's who's there.
And local
but then
papers,
thinking of what's going on in Gaza and Israel, there's a lot of people on that ground who are manipulating news as well. And they're right there. So you got to be so careful. I keep urging people to not just believe anything that instantly confirms any bias you have towards anything domestic or foreign, because if it makes you feel good, you should probably be extra suspicious of that news.
I saw a ton of conservative commentators retweeting a bunch of fake videos.
All the time. It's happened a lot.
I mean, yesterday with the shooter in Maine.
Oh yeah, yeah. I saw.
I was like, "Yo, what are you guys doing, man?"
But it's that urgency, especially Twitter X, whatever it's called, has really emphasized this more than ever, that you have to be the first or one of the beginning people to share it, to repost it. You need to be on the front lines of everything, and it means that if you wait to verify, you're behind. But actually, the truth. It's this sort of weird issue. With what you're saying with the international component of what's being reported on the ground, I always find that the language barrier is sort of the biggest obstacle, because, I don't speak either of the languages for which the main news source is. I'm just not that educated, I really like English. I'm still trying to master it. Every day is a struggle. No, I'm just kidding. But unless you're Chris Carr and you see all my typos. But the issue there is that people who can speak those languages, and I don't mean this in a mean way, have their own bias when they read the news. And so when they are reading their own sources, I mean, especially if you're, let's say an immigrant from one of these places in America, you have ties there. It makes it not that they couldn't do it accurately. I don't want to make any accusations, but it just means there's a layer of emotional there's a layer of emotion there.
There's two barriers you're talking
everyone.
about, and there's like the barrier we have to deal with here and in other English-speaking countries, where it's like the barrier of bias and the words they use to describe certain people and the qualifiers they might use in terms of like when New York Times writes about RFK Jr., all the qualifiers I got to put in front of his name. He's a COVID conspiracy theorist, all these things. But then it's also the language barrier on top of that when you're dealing with the international news. So it makes it to the point where I'm like, I can't really believe anything I'm reading right now.
And everyone just wants to go viral.
Oh, yeah. And make
whether
money
it's
off of it.
true or not, or somewhat true. Yeah.
Yep.
And then they won't delete it because
They should, Elon should get rid of, well, I say he should, but Twitter had talked about getting rid of follower counts and like retweet numbers and stuff like this. And the reason they never did, Twitter knew that it's a scoring system.
Status.
Ratio means you failed, and retweets mean you've succeeded. And that's what everyone does on X.
Yeah.
If you got rid of that, you lose the gamification of social media, and nobody wants to give up that position.
But then the
Instagram,
bots, the bots subverted that though. Like just today, our friends in Mythinformed, right? They were locked out of their account. I retweeted something about them. I happened to tag X support or whatever. Infiltrated by bots. Dozens of accounts, all created in October of this year, sharing the same link, different bots.
But are those bots? they have the blue check, right?
I don't know if they all had the blue check, but
There's
their
a lot.
names were all similar. It was like a name and then
Yeah.
like a bunch of numbers next to it and then the same link. So
They will have, a lot of those bots will now have those blue checks.
Yeah. Instagram tried something similar where they removed, they would say, we'll take away the like number, like how many likes your photo is getting. And at the time they were saying it was to combat, especially, social media addiction, but specifically, body dysmorphia issues with
Right.
young teenage girls.
Right.
The fact that they would, post certain things and they would get a reaction to it. And I don't know that it made a difference. I think in some ways it just re-emphasize that you don't know how valued you are. And I don't like that we have these digits. On the other hand, you can understand when we have the content, the influencer industry that says we need to know how many people follow you, we need to know what your reach is like, we need to know what your engagement is like, why those tools actually exist for some people as a business model.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.